Some leaders leave footprints, others leave libraries. You're tuning into the Authors on Mission podcast, where industry giants become literacy legends. In every episode, we talk with authors who turn their brilliance into books that transform lives. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission. Welcome to your authorship experience. Hello, and welcome to Authors on Mission podcast, the podcast committed to bringing you powerful insights and strategies from top experts who've achieved remarkable success and wrote a book about it. I'm your host, Danielle Hutchinson, Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission. Today, I'm thrilled to be speaking with Dean H. Morris, author of the acclaimed new historical fiction novel, The Girl of Many Crowns. In this book, D.H. really immerses us in the turbulent world of the 9th century Europe to tell the captivating story of Judith of Francia, a young princess navigating duty, survival, and unexpected love in a world of turmoil. So we'll be talking about D.H.'s years-long journey to meticulously research this lost piece of history, the discoveries that surprised her along the way, and the lessons that Judith's story holds for us about resilience, courage, and forging our own paths. And of course, we'll talk about the writing process as well. So without further ado, welcome D.H. to our show.
Thank you, Danielle, for having me. I'm excited to speak with you about this book.
Yeah, me too. You sent me an email and it was very fascinating. You mentioned that you were just doing a little bit of research into your family history, and that's how this idea for the book came into play. So I'm wondering, would you share a little bit about that to the listeners today?
Well, I had always grown up knowing about some of my ancestors because my mother was a storyteller and she loved to tell us about different ancestors who may have come over on the Mayflower or been pioneers, moved out west with covered wagons. And she also let us know that several of our lines went back to royalty. And I didn't really think much more about that until I got married. And my aunt, who was a family historian and a genealogist, gave me as a wedding present for me and my husband a huge book of genealogy and a genealogical chart that covered the table. And she showed me lines that went back 1,000 or more years. And I noticed this one that seemed to be very strange. It was a young girl, a 12-year-old girl named Judith, a princess, who was married to a 50-year-old widower king of England, so the Princess of Francia. And then 2 years later, it shows she's married to his son. And then 3 years later, it shows she's married to the Count of Flanders. And I thought, there's something wrong with our genealogy. This is a mistake on this tree, and I'm going to research it and find out who she really belongs to. Whose wife was she really? And in doing the research, I stumbled on this incredible story of a brave young girl, and it never really left my subconscious. It just kind of simmered there, and it was as if Judith kept saying, someone needs to tell my story. And then during COVID, a lot of people, I think, were writing more than usual during COVID. During COVID, I spent a lot of time finishing research and writing her story. So that is how I came across this remarkable story of Judith of Francia.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It's really cool to know that this story not only is just immersed in such rich storytelling, but also that it's grounded in a piece of your own family history too, which just, adds a layer of meaning to it, which is really special. So I guess my question is, in creating this book, you must have had just a ton of research to go through. First off, how much of it is fiction and how much of it is grounded in that research, would you say?
Well, every event that I put in there is true.
It is true.
What
Okay.
that looked like and what the people said to each other, I had to infer from, the circumstances and just try to put myself in each character's position. How would I feel about what's going on around me? Might I say? So that part, of course, actually, we do have a few conversations in the book that are taken directly from contemporary history written at the time, because they were royalty, some of their conversations were actually written down.
Oh, that makes it nice and easy.
That was nice, yeah. Unfortunately, most of them were written in Latin at the time. So I do speak German. So if it was translated into German, I was very grateful for that because I could not read the Latin. And there is a fair amount that's translated into German. There's quite a bit that's translated into English. In fact, it covers 7 years, 7 vital years in the forming of Europe. There really was no Germany, no France. All of that was it was being shaped and fought over at that time. And the main thing that I used for a starting point was something called the Annals of St. Bertin. St. Bertin is an abbey that was in France, or Francia. And at the end of each year, the monks would write a summary of what had happened during that year. Oh. So I took 7 years because that is when Judith was actually part of being the dialogue going on. The monks didn't write about women very often, unless they did something unusual or scandalous. And they felt like what had happened with Judith was unusual and scandalous. So she made it into the history annals, at least for those 7 years.
Understood. That's really cool to know, though. I bet it must have been just a huge journey of research that you went through to create this. You mentioned living and traveling through Europe specifically for this. Were there certain locations that you visited that were really important in creating the historical setting and all of these details?
Well, I did live in Europe for 12 years and able to travel throughout Europe, which was wonderful. There were a lot of places that show up in the book that I went to. Of course, they don't always look like they did over 1,000 years ago, but there are still remnants of that you can pick up on. The book begins and ends in the city of Bruges. I don't know if you've been to Bruges, but it's a beautiful little quaint city in what is now Belgium. And they call it the Venice of the North because of its canals and the boats going up and down. One thing I found in Bruges that really inspired me, they had several monuments throughout the city of Judith and Baldwin, her knight in shining armor, if you would. And they also had a statue of the Bear of Bruges. There's one scene in the book where Judith is threatened by a bear as they are escaping, and Baldwin has to protect her. That story came directly from the history of Bruges. And they seem to see Baldwin and Judith as their founding couple.
Wow.
And so had to include it.
Well, first off, really cool that you found that statue, for example, that inspired, part of the book. But, just feel really like honored and proud to know that your family was just so ingrained in the history of an established city in the world like this that, is still thriving today. That must be really cool to know and hold on to, would you say?
Yeah. Bruges is an international, a UNESCO historical site, heritage site. It's very special. And I really felt a connection, even though it looks a lot different from how it did over 1,000 years ago. You can still see vestiges of medieval history all throughout Europe. And it has a charm and a mystique all its own.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who, I do a lot of traveling for my writing as well, and I know that like being in that place and seeing the physical buildings and alleys and in this case like canals, it definitely must be inspiring. So it's just really amazing to know you experienced that and then were able to put that into the context of the book itself. So, kind of going into more of the plot of the book, I was looking through it a little bit and, I've noticed that one of the tensions, the conflict between, duty to family and kingdom versus individual freedom and happiness. So, would you mind speaking a little bit about that? How the characters grapple with that tension based on the story you mentioned. I can see how it's grounded in facts, but there must have been an element of, obviously having to bring that to life too, right?
Absolutely. The book starts out with Baldwin Ironarm, actually, and he is headed to the castle in Francia to present himself to the king. He wants to be part of the king's service. He becomes companion to Judith's younger brother and a mentor, is to teach him the arts of war and to protect him. But as he leaves, his mother tells him that loyalty is the essence of nobility. That is directly from a letter written at that time, not to Baldwin, but a contemporary of his by his mother when he went into the king's service. Ironically, that young man ended up betraying the king and didn't end well. But but that was the advice. I took the advice that young man's mother had given him and used that in Baldwin's case, so that it was true to the time, true to what a mother would have said at that time to her son, going into the same situation at a young age, 16 perhaps. So Baldwin and Judith, Judith feels that she's been raised, and all royal children pretty much are raised to do your duty. And so she feels this burden, this duty to her country and to following her father's wishes. So I don't think she would have fought. There would have been no point in fighting against being married without her approval. She would have just been married for political purposes. And she was. As soon as she turned 12, then it was legal in Francia for a girl to be married. And so I think as time goes on, you can see her progress when she goes from one marriage to the next to fulfill her duty to her country. And then she finally gets to a point where she says, "What about me? I don't want to do that anymore." And when she says that, her father puts her in prison in one of his palaces and says, "You will remain here until you agree to a third marriage." And so Baldwin, who has pledged loyalty and really takes that to heart to the king and to protect his family as well, he's at a loss. When he and Judith's younger brother come to visit her, is his loyalty to obey the king? Is his loyalty to protect the king's daughter? He's got a conflict there. And so I think it was, in my opinion, he would have felt very, very bad about breaking his oath to the king. And later he actually writes a letter to the king that is historical and tries to reconcile with him.
The way you described that really showed me how you really did connect the historical facts, these letters, these, the events that did occur, and then you were able to embellish it and you imagine exactly how they would have felt, because you're right, it definitely would have been something, really huge to go through to change your loyalties in that way and have to think about, yourself rather than your duty. It's a huge complicated thing, which I feel like still applies to, modern day life too, in different aspects, of course. So, really amazing that you're able to do that in the words of your book, because it's, again, still relatable today, I would say. Really amazing
Even
stuff.
the royals today have, until just very recently, have had the same issues. King Charles never wanted to marry Diana. He wanted to marry Camilla. But his family were not for that. And so at the command of his mother, who was queen, he married someone different. It didn't turn out as well. Eventually, now he's married to Camilla, and they're very happy. But the Princess of Japan, I think it was 2023, was it 2021? One of those. She decided she wanted to marry a commoner she had fallen in love with. And her family said absolutely not. She fled to the United States and married her commoner, but she had to give up her crown and her royalty and pretty much her family in order to do that. So you will actually see that theme played out with her younger brothers, with her cousin. They're all going through the same problem of trying to decide, can I marry who I want to marry? Or do I have to do what the empire or the king says I have to do?
Yeah, and it's, just a very complicated thing to think about. And, even in our everyday lives too, like I mentioned, like you have to hold up to your parents' expectations of the society and your friends. And, at the end of the day, perhaps that's one of the lessons that, your book shows us, is to be true to yourself. Would you agree? That's something to take away from it?
Yes, that I would hope that people would see Judith progress to the point where she has self-determination and enough courage to follow her own path. Not that she wanted to be estranged from her parents, and she happily becomes reconciled to them after the book ends. And when you read the afterword, it tells what happened to every one of the characters in the book after the book ends, so that you know how everything ended up and you're not left with anything hanging.
I'm glad that you have that too, because you wouldn't want a cliffhanger in a book that is actually, grounded in fact anyway, because there's not a cliffhanger. We know how it actually did happen. So yeah, amazing stuff there. I think I would like to kind of transition into the actual writing process, because everybody here, they're aspiring authors, they have their own ideas for books, and maybe theirs too is grounded in an event that has actually happened. So what was your process for taking the facts, coming up with these stories, getting it onto the page in a way that's engaging and relatable? What was your methodology?
Well, the research part of it, I started out, because this is nearly 1,200 years ago. So I started out just by looking online and finding her on Wikipedia, finding every one of the characters on Wikipedia. Wikipedia, you have to be careful with. It's a great place to start. The real gold in Wikipedia is at the end of the articles, because you see this bibliography that they have used in creating the article. So, and some of them have links, and you can click on it and read the passage, and then you can say, oh, that's not what they said, or yes, that does bear out in the article. But that's a great place to start. Now you have maybe 12 sources or more to go to. Those primary sources. I bought a lot of books. I checked some out from the library. I ended up with I paid for a university library card so I could research master's theses, dissertations, and I also was able to find books in their special collection that are kept separately, and then because they're so old and out of print. And I was able to read those and use those. And there is also, at the end of every one of those historical books that are written by scholars, there's usually 3, 4, 5, sometimes 10 pages worth of additional sources you can go to on different items. So if you're doing historical research and you really want it to be as accurate as possible, there's a world of resources out there, and each one can lead you to something else. And there's great sites, historical sites on the internet as well, but you have to be careful about those, just like you have to be careful about Wikipedia. Historians don't always agree on why somebody did something. Mm-hmm. So then you have to try to piece that together, almost like you're doing almost like a detective would, and say, okay, they did this, why? And if you can read all the sources about it, you can come to your own conclusion and decide which historians you agree with.
Right. Well, first off, really cool that, you really took the initiative, and not only to just, nowadays people can throw into ChatGPT and just say tell me about this person, but, you were immersed in it. You went to the libraries, you got the membership cards, you dug and just take the first bits of information that came to you from Wikipedia. So to everybody listening today, model your methods off of this too. Really dive in and think about the reasons behind why certain events might have happened, just like you did. You're right. It does take a little bit of detective work, huh?
Yes. And there were so many things going on in her world that inform the decisions she makes. Her father is trying to save his kingdom. His half-brother is trying to take his kingdom from him. He has rebellious lords who are causing problems and trying to break off. He's got Vikings attacking and ransacking Paris and Orleans and other places. And he's got the Bretons from Brittany trying to break free, and they're having their own civil problems and assassination plots going on. So he's juggling everything, trying to preserve his kingdom. And she and her brothers are in the midst of this. And so if you don't understand what's going on and why people are doing what they're doing, sometimes it doesn't make any sense, and it's very shallow. If you wanted to dive deep, you need to understand what's going on in their world as well. I also did a lot of research as I would go through the story, because as I said, I took the Annals of St. Bertin, so I would go, okay, this is the first year. This is what happened in this year. This is the first event they talk about. What was that like? I had to research everything from was the newest advancement in the military?
Right.
The newest advancement, believe it or not, was stirrups. All of a sudden, they didn't have to get off their horse to fight. They could stand and against their stirrups and brace against that and wield a sword or a lance still. And that was a huge advancement. It's funny to think of that, but that was like a big game changer for them.
Yeah, you took the words right out of the mouth there. Very interesting to think about that contrast, for sure.
Yes. And travel, what was their mode of travel? What did they eat? What did their feasts look like? Who was part of the king's household? What were their clothes like? Their jewelry? I got books on everything, several books on everything, and just read up. The truth is, I enjoy that. I enjoy the research part. And it's hard sometimes to say, it's time to stop and write about what happened in this event. My method of writing is a little bit different, perhaps, than some. My background is in theater and music. I did a lot of acting when I was younger, and I like to picture it almost like a little video in my mind. So at night, I would often read what I had just been working on or the research for the next scene. And I would keep that in my mind as I fell asleep. Sometimes 4 o'clock in the morning, I'd wake up, I'd open my computer and start writing, because my subconscious, I found, is the creative part of me. My conscious is the editor part of me. So if I was focusing too much consciously, sometimes you can get writer's block. But if you allow your subconscious to take over and just imagine what that event must have looked like, given all the information you've gathered for your research, let your subconscious do the work, I think.
Yeah. So I think, first off, it's really cool to know you went through like a more of a unique process then, and kind of seeing what kind of came naturally to you in that subconscious element. And then, just kind of piecing things together like that. I love that approach. Now, all this being said, you mentioned to me earlier that you're actually in the works of another book too on the same topic. I'm wondering if you'd like to shine a little bit light on that for our audience today, because, the mystery and intrigue of this one doesn't end with one book. There's much more that you can do with it. So do you mind what can we be on the lookout for?
Well, I am working right now on a prequel to The Girl of Many Crowns. Judith was named for her grandmother, Judith, who was an empress and of the Holy Roman Empire. This was before it was split up. She was had married a widower. Her husband was the son of Charlemagne. His name was Louis the Pious, they call him. She was his second wife, and how she was chosen to be his wife was almost Cinderella-like. They had decided, his advisors decided they wanted the king to get married again because he was moping around after losing his wife. So they sent out a notice to all the nobles in his empire, asking them if they had eligible daughters who were beautiful and talented to bring them in for a bride show. And then she was selected from that bride show. We don't have a lot of accounts of bride shows. There's a couple from the Byzantine Empire that were kind of contemporary with this. So I think that's where these advisors got the idea, was from Constantinople, and they were trying to do that for their young king. But once she's married, that Cinderella story starts to become a little darker, because she has actually has three, and then one dies, but she has several stepsons. So not the wicked stepsisters. This is the wicked stepsons who are fine with their father marrying. And when she gives birth to a daughter, that's fine. But once she gives birth to a son, and they might have to divide up the kingdom with him, when their father dies, everything changes. It sparks a civil war. They are arresting their father and keeping him in confinement, keeping her in confinement, threatening the life of her and her son, who is Judith's father, from the Girl of Many Crowns, her father. So she becomes very active in protecting her son and helping him stay alive until he can have his portion of the kingdom, and making sure that he gets it. And she's right in there in the wars, and they're planning in everything. So she's a powerful and interesting woman, I think. And that is the story I'm working on right now.
Well, I have to say, if The Girl of Many Crowns is very intriguing to begin with. That story, I mean, that's something I think a lot of us are on the edge of our seats for finding out more about too. I mean, I love all the parallels between, the classic Cinderella story, of course. Like, very interesting to know that it happened in real life, and like in such a dark way too. It's not just like the Grimm brothers, right? It actually did happen in your family history too. It's very fascinating stuff. Were you shocked to find out about like the whole bride show thing in your own genealogy?
Yes,
Yeah.
I was. I thought that was the craziest thing I'd heard. I think they were basing it also off of the story in the Bible of Esther, and where she was selected to be the bride of the emperor of Persia. So I think that's where the whole idea originated. So I'm not sure, but I think there's a connection.
Either way, really, really fascinating stuff. So if people want to get in touch with you or follow you along and, check out more of these books, where can they find you? You have a website they can reach out to you at? Or
there is a website. These are being published in a small publishing called newclassicspublishing.com. And also they can definitely email me. I would be glad to respond to email at dhmorris00@gmail.com. And I would love to communicate with them.
You're awesome. I always like to ask that question, because people get inspired by hearing about your writing process and your journeys and your ideas. So, one, they might want to know more about the story, but also about the writing process, the research, all of that. And also, everybody listening today, you can find The Girl of Many Crowns on Amazon for one. And I'm sure, we'll also link to the website as well.
Typical places, yeah.
Perfect.
Barnes and Noble, at all of them.
Yeah, there we go.
And I'm more than happy if they reach out to visit with one of their, if you have a reading group or a reading club, be glad to do that and answer questions and discuss some of the themes that are in the Girl of Many Crowns.
Wow. So like another extra perk there. If you're listening today and you have a book club, I mean, you can have the, star herself pop up and talk a little bit about it. So we'll put the links to that in the description of this podcast today. So if you're listening, go ahead and click on those and discover a little bit more about, the whole writing side of D.H. Morris. That being said, I'm wondering, do you have any last bits of advice to the aspiring authors listening today on the podcast?
Write what you love. If it's a story that has really touched your heart, I think that you will do a good job in portraying that. And I would love to have other people go into their family histories, because I have found so many fascinating stories, not just from my family history, but just doing the research. And I think, this is an amazing story. Somebody should tell this. So, may not be me, but somebody should. But even your grandparents or your great grandparents' story may actually be very inspirational and very interesting and worthy of sharing with other people and make a great novel.
I love that you shared that with us because, we have a lot of people come onto the show and they're thought leaders, they're entrepreneurs, they're sharing about their brand and their business strategies or maybe, self-help skills. But this is grounded in facts of your own life. It's historical. So, it's just the whole legacy aspect is a whole other reason to write a book. And, thank you for that tip too, just literally ask your grandma, what's our legacy like? Not only are you spending more time with your family members, but also learning about, amazing things. Like, who knows, maybe your great grandmother could also have a Cinderella story of her own, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I found that truth really is stranger than fiction. There are so many things that you wouldn't have imagined that ended up in the book that I thought this is so improbable, but it's true.
Yeah, for sure. And I think all we can do is check it out, read for ourselves and find out more about it. So if you're listening today, again, look it up, buy a copy, learn a little bit more about this fascinating piece of history because, at the end of the day, all of this dates back to so long ago that, this it's kind of like world history, if you'd say, right? Because, it's pretty much the beginning of Europe in general, right? So these characters have a part to
Right.
play in all of that in
And
one.
if King Charles had not been able to win his war against his brother, there would have been no Francia. His brother is Louis the German, and everyone would have been speaking German, and it would have all been Germany.
Wow. So that's a whole nother side of things. Like we're living in a multiverse, who knows what would have happened, and if your story was a little bit different there. I love that though. So many things to think about. So everybody listening today, as we're signing off, you can think about the fact that your own family might have these kind of stories, another whole path you can take in your writing careers and journeys. D.H. Morse, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure to learn about this whole other side of writing that's just untapped into as much as we'd love to hear about it. You know what I mean? Love
Thank
all.
you so much for having me, Danielle.
It's been a pleasure. It's a fascinating journey, an inspiring testament to the power of just, perseverance, connection, staying true to yourself within the book. And to our listeners, The Girl of Many Crowns it shows us how when you really look into your backstory, you can entertain others, you can educate others, you can uplift others. So D.H. Morris, thank you for, allowing us a window into your passionate research process. And to all the aspiring authors out there, keep learning, keep honing on your craft, keep sharing your stories with the world. We'll see you next time on the Authors on Mission podcast. Thanks again.
This is Danielle Hutchinson reminding you that somewhere, someone needs the book that only you can write. Visit authorsonmission.com to start your legacy. Until next time, keep leading, keep inspiring, and keep thinking in chapters. Have a great day.